Ever since the United States lost in Cuba 5 years ago, we have been waiting for the moment where we could put that behind us and take a step forward. And that moment has finally arrived in World Cup qualifying. We are just days away from the U.S. starting the 2022 World Cup qualifying cycle. And it feels like it just crept up on us out of nowhere. In order to prepare for the first game against El Salvador, I've brought on Jake from FIFAmerica. Jake is going to give us some insights and help us kind of wrap our head around how we're going to approach this 3-game window. So, Jake, before we start talking about World Cup qualifying, I want to know on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10, how are you feeling about everything going into this game?
I feel an 8. And
An 8?
To your point with Cuba, I'm always scared. I'm just always scared now. The worst possible thing could happen. We could not make the World Cup, but I will say I feel very confident going into this game.
No, and I think an 8 is correct. I would say I feel an 8 as well. And I think so much of the reason why I feel an 8 is because of the results that we had, not only the Nations League, but especially the Gold Cup. I think the Gold Cup was so important, not just because we won that tournament with a B team, but also the way that we won it, the way that we went through the tournament without giving up a goal in open play. And the fact that the team hasn't really been giving up goals in open play all that much in the last year anyway. So just with that defensive mindedness in mind, I think it sets us up very well for World Cup qualifying, which is going to be just some of the most brutal conditions most of these players have ever played in. So I'm right there with you with an 8.
Yeah, and to be fair, the brutal conditions, like that's what I'm really worried about. I'm sure we're going to talk about it going forward. But a lot of our players are 23 and under. Pulisic is really the only kind of youngster in this group that played in Cuba that lost and didn't make the World Cup didn't make the World Cup with that team. So that's kind of what's worrying me is are we good enough to overcome that first time that we get punched in the mouth? Are we good enough to overcome that first time where we have an errant pass and we go down early maybe? Like, do we have enough experience and motivation to get through those moments? That's really the 2 that's taking away from the 10 confidence.
Well, tell me about the 8. Where is the 8 coming from? Is it more or less kind of along the same lines that I kind of just laid out?
It's about the talent in this group right now. And then to get to your point, actually, we got so much good experience this summer, not just for our A team, but for our A minus B team, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, if you look at the depth chart, the top 50 U.S. players this summer got at least 3 to 5 competitive games in tournament play. So for me, when I look at the World Cup qualifying now, and we're moving to 3 games in each window instead of the usual 2, you're going to need all the depth that you can take with you. And not just for this round of games, but going forward, we took 26 players with this roster. Timothy Way is injured, so it's down to 25. But I guarantee you that there will be at least 40 players that make the rosters over the next few months.
40, that's a lot. But I'm right there with you in the sense that, I said that this was the strongest U.S. men's national team roster that we've ever put together. And a lot of people said the Nations League roster was better. And my thinking was that the Nations League roster had a Gio Reyna that didn't have that 90 minutes against Honduras and didn't have that 120 or whatever it was against Mexico. Same goes for Weston McKennie. Same goes for, so many of these players have not had that experience. And then the fact that we're bringing these players in, but with that international experience, but with that having that stretcher game against Honduras, that was just 90 minutes of brutal, just getting kicked and then just Honduras scraping at everything they could possibly have. And then that absolute war with Mexico in which, they were up against the fans, they were up against the stadium, they were up against everything, and they just kind of kept clawing back. And then you have this other tier of players that went through that Gold Cup and had to go through, being labeled a B team by everyone and being told that they weren't good enough, being told by idiots like me with YouTube channels that we would, be happy getting out of the group, and that's about all we could expect. And then they went on to shut all of us up and win that tournament. So it's not just about the names on the paper. It's about that these names on this paper are in my opinion, stronger than they were at the beginning of the summer. So that just has me so excited. So I think it's time that we actually kind of take a look at these names on the paper and how we're going to apply it to El Salvador. So let's get the big picture out of the way. First of all, it is a away fixture at El Salvador. It is the first of three, so we're going to be in El Salvador, and then we're going to come home to Canada, and then we're going to go to Honduras. If we're looking at it on paper, El Salvador is the weakest opponent of the three. That being said, you did lose Tim Weah, and we do have Christian Pulisic. I'm not sure really what nobody knows. I'm assuming that if he made the trip to the United States and he's in Nashville right now, he's going to be fine for the game and he can play 90 minutes if you want him to. I'm assuming, though, not a medical professional, no idea what's going on. But so we got 3 games. We got the weakest opponent coming up first, but it's also the opponent that you want to set the tone against. How do you approach these games if you're Greg Berhalter, specifically the first one against El Salvador? Let me interrupt Jake for 1 second to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, and that is OneFootball. OneFootball is the soccer app that has everything you need to know about the game that we love. You can track your favorite players, your favorite teams, your favorite leagues, all at the touch of a button, and you'll get push notifications whenever anything happens with your favorite players. Like, let's say for instance you heard the name Valérien Balogun in this video and you want to track him and see whenever he starts for Arsenal what's going on with him, if there's any news about him. You can actually look him up in the app, hit the little star by his name, and now you are locked into tracking everything that happens in Balogun's career. If you want to download the OneFootball app for free, you just click the link in the description of this video. It is totally free. Not only will you then have the most powerful resource for any soccer fan out there, but you'll be supporting the Yank Report directly, and you'll be supporting a company that supports US soccer content creators like me. Now let's get back to Jake.
If I take the holistic view that there is going to be an inherent strategy that Greg needs to take into all 3 games, so taking the first one into account against El Salvador, it is an away game. It's the first of this cycle. We need a result. So I actually think that when Greg looks at the team that he takes to start against El Salvador, it will have a few more of the veterans in that starting 11 than you might expect. I wouldn't be surprised to see Deandre Yedlin on the field and maybe Serginho Dest move to left back. I would be surprised if
Anthony Robinson?
Tim Ream makes the field. Like, we'll talk about the roster later maybe, but I don't think Tim Ream is there to play a ton of minutes. But in my mind, like, you need to bring some experience with you into El Salvador. The team that we're going to play against is one that isn't really worried to step up and pressure when we're holding the ball. When they played Mexico and just barely lost in the Gold Cup 1-0 to that team, they really press them when Mexico is holding the ball. So I worry again about moments when maybe we make an errant pass, or the press is getting to us, the fans are getting to us, and maybe we go down an early goal. That's not really a scenario that isn't out of the question. That can happen. Mm-hmm. So we need players on the field to really level our mentality and keep us stable. And I think when Greg looks at that team to bring into the starting 11 against El Salvador, experience is going to be something that he wants to have on the field and not just on the bench. If we talk about, Canada and Honduras, those might be games where you think, I want my best 11 players on the field. I don't think that's going to be the case against El Salvador. I think Greg is going to want to get a result over how we play or how we look on TV. And that's going to mean playing some players that have experience in CONCACAF.
Yeah, and I think we saw that in the opening game of the Gold Cup, that, Greg got absolutely ripped for playing guys like Jackson Ewell and Jonathan Lewis. But although it did look like he went heavy on experience in that first game, we didn't see guys like Busio or Williamson or some of the players getting their first caps ever start. I would have thrown Hoppy in that list, but Hoppy was also getting into form, so he wasn't quite in shape for that first game of the Gold Cup. But I think that Greg would definitely open up with experience. I think I'm with you right there. Now, if we play this out in our heads in like a game theory type of thing, we do have Canada coming up. If you're the coach of Canada, are you playing your best lineup against the United States, or is that United States away fixture one in which you're kind of you're resting your guys there in order to have your big guns for the other two games? That's kind of a thing I've been thinking about recently.
It's a really interesting point, right? Because essentially, if you win your home games and tie your away games, you're through to the World Cup. You're going to get top three in the group with that. Canada has a realistic chance to make the World Cup this cycle.
Yeah,
And
they're the consensus third best team in the region.
yeah, so if you're going up against the US, I think he's going to put out a team that has 9 or 10 of the best 11. But honestly, I think the Canadian coach is very underrated, and he threw a lot of curveballs at the US in the Gold Cup. And if you rewatch that game, which the US won, I don't think a ton of people would watch the full 90 minutes and say the US deserved to win that game outright. There were a lot of moments in that game where Canada confused us, overloaded our flanks, and I worry that that can happen again. Although, to your point with game theory, like I really don't think Canada is going to bring their strongest starting 11 at least into the game against the US in Nashville.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at as well. So that kind of leads me to wanting to definitely get out on the front foot and really get a result in this first game against El Salvador. So let's actually jump in it, as we've been kind of beating around the bush for the last 12 minutes talking about everything but the lineup, which is, I think, what everybody is tuned in to really see and just hear discussion about. You know, leading up to this game, and in a lot of my videos, I talked about my thought that I think the strongest way to get a result in El Salvador is lining up in a back three. I thought that when we played it in the Gold Cup, that it looked really fluid. It solved a lot of the issues that we were having. It also created this really defensive first approach, which I think is extremely popular in world soccer right now, especially at the tippity top of the world soccer game with squads like Chelsea and Man City, Bayern Munich, Tottenham, who's at the top of the Premier League, is very defensive first and kind of
We're 3 games
second.
in though. Top of the Premier League.
What about look at a team like Chelsea? It's, we got these 3 very strong defenders in the back. We've got 2 midfielders in the middle who are very good at winning the ball, number one, but also not making stupid turnovers, which I think is just like the key of world soccer right now, is stupid turnovers in the defensive third that like leads immediately to chances. That's how everybody is winning and losing right now. And then they have 3 guys up top that are very strong attackers, and we're going to get turnovers. We're going to turn it up immediately to our strong attackers, and we're going to let them go. Now, I'm talking a little bit too much about just soccer tactics in 2021 right now, but do you see that 3-man back line as what Greg's going to do, or do you think he's going to go with that traditional 4-3-3?
So I do think Greg is going to go with the 3 in the back, and one of the main reasons is because of his roster selection. So James Sands tells me essentially that he's depending on a 3 in the back, at least for the majority of the games or the majority of the time. Also, the Tim Ream inclusion, again, he's the only other left-footed defender other than John Brooks on this roster. So if you're playing 3 in the back, you need someone that's passing. So if we do rest John Brooks, it could be Tim Ream, it could be Miles Robinson, but
yeah, Miles Robinson and Mark McKenzie are both very 2-footed players.
yes,
to be
they're
fair,
serviceable.
but gosh, Half Spaces said we just don't produce left-footed players at all in this country.
To your point about the way that Chelsea plays, and I'll give all of your viewers an exclusive look at kind of my scouting report for El Salvador. Their main weakness right now, or the thing that I think that Greg should exploit, is that their fullbacks who are good. It's Alex Roldan, and I'm forgetting the other person's name, but he plays in the El Salvadorian League. But they had a really good Gold Cup. The way that they play is they follow the wingers man for man very tightly. And the way that Mexico tried to exploit El Salvador, which is something that the U.S. can do, is have your wingbacks overlap when the fullbacks start to come in with the wingers. So, for instance, if Christian Pulisic or maybe it's Brendan Aronson that's playing, they tuck in to receive a pass. and whether it's Anthony Robinson or Serginho Dest are making an overlapping run, there's a lot of space there playing against El Salvador. They usually play in a 4-3-3, much more defensively than you would normally expect. But I actually think that the way that Chelsea plays with three in the back and then your three attackers are quite central. That's actually a perfect way to break down this El Salvador team.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've been hearing so much about creativity and the lack of creativity in the squad. See if you can help me out. I remember hearing a famous coach recently talking about the lack of creativity in the world game right now, and they said something to the effect of like an interception and a counterattack is just as effective as creativity, or something like that.
Yeah.
Does that?
I don't know who said it, but it sounds a lot like something Jesse Marsh would say. And I've watched some of his coaching, I don't know what you call them, conferences.
Yeah,
and that's very similar to, it's kind of like the evolution of the gegenpress, which is basically you make your offensive opportunities by making the other team turn over the ball in dangerous positions in transition. So you don't necessarily need a number 10 anymore in the modern game, at least.
Because they don't exist.
Right.
There is none.
And you get the same opportunities by pressing up high up the field and allowing the other team to kind of make those opportunities for you. I actually think that's why someone like Kaden Clark isn't really coming into this team and isn't really making waves in terms of someone that's being snubbed, because that player doesn't really exist in the way that the U.S. men's national team plays right now.
Julian Green's another one.
Yeah. And Green, I think, probably deserves a shot, but he's a little bit more flexible than a Kaden Clark would be. But yeah, I think for me, especially in the modern game, the offensive players need to do a little bit more than just create. Now, in fairness, I actually think that there's an opportunity to play Gio Reyna in the center of the park here, whether that's as an 8 or as a more of a 10. But he is playing as an 8, which is basically a box-to-box midfielder for Dortmund right now. And he's played that since preseason into the 3 Bundesliga games that they played. So I do see opportunities. I think Timothy Weah going down injured actually hurts those chances to see Gio Reyna central. Yeah. But I don't think there's really a dearth of creative talent when you talk about Christian Pulisic, Brendan Aronson, Conrad. Like, all of them can play centrally, can drop in deep, can receive the ball and turn on a dime. It remains to be seen whether that works in the U.S. team, but I don't think that there's kind of a restriction of creative players on this roster.
Yeah, we grew up on YouTube highlights of like Kaká playing these like crazy through balls, or like Pirlo playing these beautiful balls over the top. Maybe it was Luka Modric or Toni Kroos just playing these incredible balls. But now if you look at the game, like more often than not, the goals are created because a turnover, a press leads to a turnover, and then you have 1 to 3 passes and then a shot on goal. You're not having this like you're not seeing teams get broken down like the tiki-taka Barcelona teams did or anything like that. It's much more smash and grab in your face and then be very sound defensively, which isn't as much fun to watch, honestly, but it's incredibly effective.
Yeah, there's not much room anymore for Ronaldinho's, for Kaká's, for
everybody
Modric.
got to run, everybody got to press, everybody. You'd rather, I mean, this sounds crazy, and I bet you Filippo, if he heard me say this, would pull out all of his hair. But you'd almost rather have a Mason Mount than a Ronaldinho in your side right now, because you need that guy that's gonna run and run and run and run, and then wherever he gets the ball, can do something more or less clever with it, not virtuoso with it, but clever with it enough, and can shoot and can do all the offensive things, as opposed to the guy who is an absolute god whenever he's on the ball, but whenever he's not on the ball, isn't bringing much to your squad. We are getting way off topic talking about the modern game and like tactics in the modern game versus the flair that seems to have gone away. Let's talk about goalkeeper. This is one of the most controversial discussions in all of U.S. soccerdom right now. Who do you have starting between the pipes for the first game? Or let me rephrase that. Who do you think Greg is going to have starting between the pipes for the first game?
Zach Steffen and Zach Steffen.
Yeah, I think you're right.
an easy one for me. And maybe Greg's going to prove me wrong, but if you're backing up one of the best goalkeepers in the world and playing at Man City, I'm sorry, but if you're a Nottingham Forest goalie or the goalie for the New England Revolution, I'm choosing the Man City goalkeeper.
Yeah, so you're a big Euro snob, is what you're saying. But no, I think Greg has shown throughout his tenure that if you're going to take somebody's spot, you got to do it on the field. And you got to do it head to head. So I think that Greg is a guy that kind of respects incumbents in that way. We saw that in the Gold Cup where Jackson Ewell just flat out lost his spot to Kellen Acosta. We've seen that many times where many players have lost their spots because a new player has come in and their play on the field has absolutely taken it away from them. With that being said, though, does that mean that that Zach Steffen just gets all 3 games, or do you think it's going to be like a game for game kind of thing, or do you think it's going to be, this just job is up for grabs and who shows better in training?
Whoever it is, I think will get all 3 games. It's very rare to see a keeper be one of the players that you rest. And I think what we're all forgetting as well is that until Steffen really makes a mistake, it's not really up for grabs, like you said, for Horvath or Turner. They've both shown that they're extremely capable, and I think all of us would genuinely trust all 3 in net. But taking it even back from Man City, Zach Steffen was Greg Berhalter's guy in Columbus. So everyone's kind of saying, well, he's a backup in Man City. He has a lot of allegiances built and a lot of history with Greg Berhalter. And I do think until he truly makes a mistake or gives away an easy goal or loses us a game, it's not really up for debate if he should be the number 1 keeper or not.
So moving right along, you said earlier that you think it's going to be a 3-man back line. Who do you think is going to make up that 3-man back line for the U.S. in that first game?
So it's got to be John Brooks. He's got to be one of them. And this is going to get very interesting because Alexi Lalas's depth chart suddenly looks very realistic, which we all probably hate to admit. But
I have a take out there that I haven't put out there because I think I'd get murdered for it. But like, how often does Alexi Lalas's takes that he gets reamed for like end up coming true? Like for so long he said like Josie Altidore was still in the mix. And Josie Altidore was still in the he tends to more often than not, whenever you look at things from the grand scheme over time.
Yeah.
His
his
batting average is not terrible.
Yeah. I'll finish my center backs, but I could talk all day about how talking about the perspective that Greg has or the perspective that the Federation has doesn't really lead to the most popular opinions in the
very
community.
much, yeah. Fans are very much like, what have you done for me lately?
Yes.
Like looking at things through a magnifying glass instead of that 30,000 feet approach.
Yes.
But stop beating about in the bush. Give me your other 2 center backs.
I think Walker Zimmerman is the other center back. And if we play a 3 in the back, I think it's James Sands. It's tough, too, because Miles Robinson has done more than enough to staple his name into the starting 11. I just don't think, again, going into the first World Cup qualifying game, that we trust a younger center back that could potentially get rattled, but hasn't shown himself to get rattled in those big games. But I do think, I would feel very good about those back 3. You could probably swap out Zimmerman or Sands for Miles Robinson, but Sands is the best passer other than John Brooks in the center back pool.
Yeah, agreed. I think Miles Robinson is a starter. I believe he's 24 years old. He's kind of entering that prime of his athletic career. So if anybody can play 90 minutes, I think it might be Miles Robinson. Just the play that he had during the Gold Cup was so phenomenal. He was one of the players of the Gold Cup. I know Hector Herrera won player of the Gold Cup, but if there was a runner-up, it was Miles Robinson. I mean, he was an absolute force in the defense. And I feel like whenever you have a guy like John Brooks, who is a phenomenal fullback, a phenomenal center back, and a phenomenal reader of the game, but kind of lacks in range and athleticism, and you pair him next to a guy like Miles Robinson, who can run all over the field, it makes me feel a little bit better. So I would like to see Miles Robinson. And then to your to your point, like that third guy, I don't know. I mean, it can be Walker Zimmerman, it can be James Sands. I think James Sands is more of a center guy in a back three, and I think that that's where John Brooks will play. So I think he'll sub out for John Brooks. So I don't know if we'll see him at one of those side spots. It could be Mark McKenzie. I'm fine with that. Although McKenzie hasn't had a ton of minutes coming in, he hasn't been getting a lot of playing time. But let's move out to the fullbacks. Who do you see playing fullback?
So I know I said that I could see Yedlin starting in El Salvador, but I don't think you can take away a player playing for Barcelona. Serginho Dest has to be my right back that I'm trusting. The left back is a little bit more interesting because Anthony Robinson has kind of taken a step back, and it almost started with some of his games with the U.S. men's national team over the summer. He was falling a bit in form for Fulham. They got relegated. He was probably their best player over the course of the season, but he hasn't really picked it back up, and he is getting a lot of playing time for Fulham, which is great. The other player that I think potentially can take the left back position is George Bellow. He was trusted with a really difficult game in the final in the Gold Cup, and he showed really well. He came back with the fire in him in his MLS games after the Gold Cup. He's been in great form for Atlanta. So yeah, I think if I were Greg, it's almost a toss-up, but I would probably start Bellow. And again, kind of that same conversation with Stefan, start starting players, and until they make a mistake or show you any differently, that's going to be their spot.
It's incredible that you made up that point about Anthony Robinson, because there's not a player in the lineup that scares me more in World Cup qualifying than Anthony Robinson.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
I want to know more.
U.S. soccer fan base certainly picks on certain players. They find certain guys that they don't like, and they just rip them apart. And other guys seem to skate free. And one guy that I think has just been skating free under the radar, a guy that people always just like put in their lineup, is Anthony Robinson, despite the fact that, has he ever had a good game for the U.S. men's national team? Like a good game?
I don't think so.
I think the best he's ever done has been neutral. And, there might be a few highlights that you can pick from him. I know in that Costa Rica game, he had a nice cross in that set up the first goal. I remember in the Honduras game, he had a nice cross in to Josh Sargent that Josh Sargent wasn't able to put away. Spoiler alert there. But outside of his crossing, Anthony Robinson has had some of the worst turnovers of anybody in possession, especially in the build-up, either around midfield or in the defensive third. And like we discussed earlier, giveaways in possession in the defensive third and around midfield is how teams die. That's how you give up goals. We saw it with Gianluca Busio in the Serie A this weekend. And that game against Costa Rica, even when we were running them over, I think it was like 4-0 whatever it was. I don't remember what the score was. There was a couple of balls that Anthony Robinson, under absolutely no pressure, just played just really sleepy balls that created I believe the only two chances Costa Rica got in that entire game.
He
scares me to no end.
He has one of the largest disparities between club form and national team form that I've ever seen. And in that sense, he kind of reminds me of Timothy Chandler, who was like a locked-on starter for a great Frankfurt team in Bundesliga. And every time he came to play for the U.S., he stunk. He didn't have a good game in a U.S. jersey.
I think he's being asked to do different things. I think if you want a fullback that is just going to run up the sideline and pour in crosses, like a traditional fullback in the English Championship or maybe even the lower tier of the EPL, he can do that at an EPL level. He can be one of the top guys out there that is just really, really fast, that can hit a really nice cross, a really nice driven cross, and can put in an effort defensively. But if you're asking him to participate in the build-up, if you're asking him to do like some complex defensive stuff where he's kind of keying in with his midfielders to know when to make this rotation, and then keying in with the winger in front of him to make other rotations and kind of moving in and out, I think that's where he kind of falls short. And I think that there's other guys that we've seen traditionally like this, like Deandre Yedlin is like almost a mirror image of that. A guy who athletically, if he's asked to do that championship thing where he just runs down the field and puts in crosses, phenomenal. One of the top guys and can play at an EPL level and get a huge paycheck for doing that. But if you're asking him to possess the ball and slow things down and make smart passes and stuff like that, that's just not really his game. And there's other guys who can't play at a high level doing that other thing that are better than him at the other thing, and it's a tough thing for it's a tough discussion for fans to have, because it's always like, well, if he can play in the EPL, then he's better than this other guy that's playing for, some non-EPL level team. But it's just a reality in sports, and especially soccer.
It takes a very objective stance to say that George Bellow might deserve to start over someone like Anthony Robinson, because it really challenges your thinking in the way that you're evaluating club form. And an example of that, for instance, is like Sargent versus any of the other forwards. So Sargent is playing for a Premier League team. He's had a few goals in a cup game, but Ricardo Pepe is coming in. He's on form in MLS. Like, how do you rate league versus league, player versus player, age versus age? I think when you say someone like George Bellow over Anthony Robinson, you're kind of challenging that perspective internally to say, oh man, do I really rate like an 18-year-old or 19-year-old MLS left back over someone that has Premier League experience and was one of the better players on their team?
Very true.
And you might.
And I think you're jumping ahead to the forward. Let's now that we got your fullbacks,
Reel me back in, Sam.
I think I'm pretty sure who you're. So if you're playing a 3-man back line, how are you setting up your midfield?
Yeah, Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie have to be there.
So that's I don't think you need to go into much explanation about that.
The fact that you can have like two of the best prospects that the U.S. has ever produced in that position, and they're both 23 or younger. Like, that just feels so good to say, to have the security blanket that they give your team to really get stable and control the flow of the game is something that we haven't had before. And even when you go back to like prime Michael Bradley, Jermaine Jones days, they were really just destroyers. Like, they didn't really control the game like they can. And people will look at Weston McKennie's role at Juventus and say, why is he playing attacking midfielder? He's played all 10 field positions for Schalke before, so I'm not surprised that they're using him flexibly, but it is okay. Like, he is great at pressing, at counter pressing, and to the point where we're talking about the modern game, there's no two better players on the U.S. than Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie at that.
And we've seen over the years that one of the main ways to score goals in CONCACAF away games is through set pieces, because the field is absolute trash and it's just so difficult to play the ball and play pretty soccer. I mean, we're looking around at this U.S. men's national team, and you got guys like John Brooks, who we know is good in the air. If you play Miles Robinson, I know you don't want to play him, but Miles Robinson is another guy who's an absolute demon in the air. And Weston McKennie, is he elite?
Be better than
in the
all
air?
of them.
Like, I don't know. There's not too many guys in the world that, I mean, there's, Cristiano Ronaldo's the top dog, but, on that next tier, I mean, Weston McKennie is an absolute phenom in the air.
Even if you go back to watch his like FC Dallas Academy days, he was doing that. And then to do it at the professional level at Schalke and Juventus. And then he learned under the tutelage of Ronaldo until he moved to Man United. So, yeah, I would actually put his heading ability into the elite status. I would.
I was listening to the Orange Slices podcast the other day with Mark McKenzie and Heath Pierce, and Mark McKenzie was talking about like just marking Weston in practice and like thinking that you have him, and then next thing you know, like he's above you and he's heading the ball into the net. Like,
that's always a good indicator of like people in practice telling you exactly what's happening.
So you have these two pivot central midfielders. Who do you have in front of them?
So if everyone's healthy, if Pulisic is ready to play the full 90, I have Pulisic on the left, Reyna on the right, and I am going to go with Sargent right now. But that role, to me, the striker position, is the most up in the air right now, along with the left back position. On merit and on paper, Josh Sargent should be the starter. And especially when you consider like who has been with the team, who has U.S. men's national team experience. But then when you actually dive into, like, has he had a CONCACAF away game yet? He's really just played mostly in friendlies against CONCACAF opponents, or he's played in the US in tournaments against CONCACAF opponents. I do think Ricardo Pepe is probably going to start. If I had to choose a game, it'd be against Honduras. But yeah, if I'm picking my best 11 right now, it's going to be Sargent at 51% confidence,
Yeah, I think
which isn't
Sargent.
much.
Sargent's the guy because of all that he brings to the table. I think we've been talking about defense and counter pressing and winning the ball back as like big things in the modern game, and Sargent does that. If you look at his Bundesliga statistics at an elite level, he's
Yep.
phenomenal at that. He's also, if you look at the rest of our striker pool, his ability to combine and his ability to make his teammates around him better is better than I'd say than Jordan Pefok. I don't know about Ricardo Pepe in that. I think he's slightly better than Ricardo Pepe, but Ricardo Pepe's got some skills, man, and we'll talk about Ricardo Pepe in a second. The thing about Sargent is just the goals. We saw him score some goals for Bremen in the preseason, and then he came to Norwich, and he's had a hot start there. But we're still not seeing that consistent game in, game out score from Josh Sargent, and that's going to leave the striker position open for a while. But I think you're right. When we talked about having experience coming in, Josh Sargent does have that game against Honduras. He does have the Nations League game against Mexico. So he does have a little bit more experience than the other guys, but not a whole lot more. But
Yep.
I'd agree with you that I think it's going to be Sargent. But I think all this to say that I really want to talk to you about Ricardo Pepe. Now,
Sounds
you
good.
just put together a YouTube video where you kind of did you did a deep dive into Ricardo Pepe and how he plays, and you pointed out something to me that I never noticed, and that is the unbelievable accuracy of this guy's shots. I mean, so many strikers, when they score goals, it's just like, beating the keeper by a little bit. But Pepe, it's always in the corner. And he's always not just like putting shots in the corner, but he's watching the keeper and trying to see, like, is the keeper cheating one way or another? Is his weight on one foot or another? He's never like firing shots like bullets. It's always just enough pace to beat the guy. And the guy that comes to mind whenever I say that, and I'm not calling this guy the same type of player, nobody's the same type of player, but Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi in his history, so many of his goals were not like bullets. Like in
Yeah.
a Cristiano Ronaldo sense. It was always just what I need and the accuracy to get past the keeper. And I see that from Ricardo Pepe, and I'm so excited. So you think that Ricardo Pepe is actually going to get a start in this window?
I do. I don't think he's going to play, or he's not going to start against El Salvador. And I don't think he's going to start against Canada either, because Greg is going to want to put together what at the moment would be his best 11, which I don't think Pepe has over a Sargent or a Pefok. For the Honduras game, though, I do see an opportunity. Say we're at 6 points already, winning El Salvador and Canada games. There's definitely a big chance that Pepe has maybe on form, is the best player at the moment, and you give everyone else a rest. And keep in mind the substitutes or the replacement players for the wingers from Pulisic to Reyna would be Brendan Aronson and Conrad, who are both going to be, Champions League or Europa League level players. So there's not really a huge drop off, which again feels crazy to say, from players that are feeding Pepe the ball. So yeah, I do think he could get the start. It really depends on our situation at that point, how many points we've taken away. But yeah, if we're at 6 points, there's a strong chance that I could see Pepe starting that Honduras game.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, the path to the World Cup has always been tie on the road and win at home, and that would mean getting 5 points from these games. So if we're 6 points after 2, then we're already ahead of the game. Though I think U.S. men's national team fans are lusting for blood, and we want 9 points, and we've got a squad that can do it. I mean, we got a phenomenal squad. You just mentioned Conrad, and Conrad is a player that I mean, what can you say about a young player? I believe he's 20 years old, just coming right into the French league and just slotting right in as a starter, running at players, being incredibly exciting. The fan base is always so fired up whenever he's on the field. He's a flair player. He makes people just fired up on Twitter. He's one of the guys that I see a lot of people on Twitter have as their avies right now. He's that type of guy in the fan base, and we're 40 minutes in and we just mentioned him. I think that speaks to kind of the excitement around this roster. But, how do you see now that Tim Weah is injured? How do you see Conrad fitting in? Do you want to have him start a game? That would be a lot for a young player. How do you see Greg kind of working him into to the action in this window?
I think the Lille move really helped him just cement himself as a trustworthy player to start for 90 minutes. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Marseille. Yes, I'm getting Timothy Weah mixed up.
Yeah, you're getting our young French league players, French league wingers mixed up.
All two of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, his move to Marseille, I think, has really helped just build a trust within the fan base that he can go full 90. When he appeared for Barcelona in whether it was preseason games or I think he had like 14 minutes as an appearance in a Champions League game for Barcelona, you could see that there were moments that he could easily make the team for the U.S. men's national team. I think what's exciting now about him is just the consistency that he's showing. He has 2 assists so far. Those stats are great, but I think it's also just the fact that he's fit so seamlessly into the team and he doesn't look out of place. So yeah, if we talk about him, if we talk about Gianluca Busio, I think what you can take from those games and from those performances might not necessarily be the stats, but just would that person stick out to you on the field, or do they look like they belong on the field? I do think Conrad could get a start here. Again, if we're 6 points up and going into Honduras, it's a hostile team and a hostile environment, but I mean, that might be another reason to rest people like Reyna and Pulisic, that you don't want to risk them getting injured or having to play another 90 minutes, because actually the weekend right after has Premier League, has other top 5 league games on. So you might go from, playing 3 games and then going right back 3 days later to play in an intense Premier League game. I do think Conrad can get a start. He will probably see substitution minutes in at least one of the first 2 games. But yeah, I think he's a player that Greg will want to start phasing him into the team as much as possible.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, just with the amount of games that we have, we're going to have to see all these players. And figuring out who to start, where, and when is going to be a very difficult riddle to figure out. I believe there's 5 substitutes for these games, so they're going to be able to bring in a lot of different people, and I think the best case scenario for the U.S. would be to get a couple of early goals and to be able to kind of sit back and substitute and allow players to get rest. But it could just as easily be a situation that we saw against Honduras in the Nations League, where they're going to scrap and fight and just fight you for every inch of every blade of grass and make it as messy and unfun and uncomfortable to play against as possible, and it could be just a drag out fight, and that's not what we want. We don't want all these games to be a war of attrition, but it could go down that way.
Yeah, and you have to remember too that the other teams that we're playing against also have to do the exact same thing that we're doing. So we're sitting here, we need to talk about the US and what our kind of game theory is going into these 3 games. At the same time, Honduras would have played 2 games at that point. I don't know who their opponents are right now, but that 3rd game against the U.S., it might actually help us. Something that we talked about going into the Canada game, will Canada play their best team? It might actually help us that many of these teams could potentially rest their best players against the U.S. because they don't expect to get a result. And that just inherently makes all of the games for the U.S. team a little bit easier. But yeah, you do not want to go into the Honduras game with 3 points or less, needing to get a result when you know they're going to drop back. They're going to make it as difficult as possible, to your point. And that's just not a position that you want to be starting your best players in away from home, having to go right back to play in their club teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's look beyond this World Cup qualifying window for a second. Greg brought in a roster of 26 players, but that meant that he had to leave off a few very talented players, very young and very talented players. Talking about guys like Joe Scally and Chris Richards, there's a few names, like even Gianluca Busio and Tanner Tessman, guys that have just recently made moves like Sam Vines. There's a lot of names that could be factored into World Cup qualifying down the road. Who are some guys that were left off of this list that you're excited about seeing with the national team?
So I will come back to our La Liga pair of Matt Miazga and Yunus Musa. I think they both still have, well, Matt Miazga especially still has a lot to give to this team. I think he's fallen off a lot of people's radars just because he's part of the Chelsea loan army. But I think this team that he's playing for, Alaves in La Liga, is seeming to really trust him immediately. And if he can get a ton of playing time in La Liga, then again, there's no reason why he shouldn't be part of this roster. Yunus Musa, when he's healthy, is probably second or third in our midfielder depth chart in terms of people that can transition the ball from defense to offense. I think Chris Richards, one thing for everyone listening as well, I think Greg really cherishes relationships with the club teams and the way that they want to develop their players. So Joe Scally, for example, has started all of the preseason games. He's played, I think, 2 or 3 games starting against really difficult opponents for Mönchengladbach. I'm assuming that in the background, that club team is telling Berhalter that if Scally stays with them over this break, he's going to be that much better for it going into the next round of games. Chris Richards, I've just seen, like right before we hopped on, that he's finalizing a loan to Hoffenheim. So
he is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would temper
in the morning I saw
say,
talks were back on, so
yes.
Yeah, that's huge news for the U.S. national team.
So yeah, when you're like, oh, come on, Tim Ream over Chris Richards. Well, first of all, I don't think they're there for the same reason. And second of all, I think Greg is much more in tune than all of us on what's happening at the club level and kind of going through the transfer window. And I just think for people like Gianluca Busio, Tanner Tessman, for example, kind of similar to Joe Scally, Venezia is probably saying, hey, they've just gotten here. If you leave them with us to train with the team, you can take them in the next window and they'll be that much more comfortable, that much more in form. And I think Greg constructed a really good roster based around everyone that's recently moved and everyone that is moving soon.
Yeah, that makes sense. I completely forgot about Yunus Musa. I mean, I completely forgot about one of the most talented 18-year-olds in the world because he's been injured and he just hasn't been in the mix for a while. But yeah, I mean, that's a player that was so exciting whenever he debuted last year and then kind of tailed off at the end of the season. And we're just hoping for him to kind of figure it out this year and maybe move a little bit more centrally for Valencia and just continue developing. A few of the other guys one guy you didn't mention that you mentioned earlier on in the video was Kaden Clark. Now, Kaden Clark is... Now. Yeah, Kaden Clark is kind of wearing that crown as like the MLS golden boy, although maybe Ricardo Pepe passed him up, honestly. There's a few guys in MLS who I think definitely could factor into this roster. And Kaden Clark is one of them that I just don't know if I see a direct path for him right now, considering where he plays on the field and the quality that we have at those positions. But one that I do see an immediate path for is a guy that I'm not necessarily certain about his international future, and that's Julian Arago. I saw Julian Arago have a ridiculous game against LAFC this weekend. His international future is not quite clear, but if he decides at any point, and I think that this Ricardo Pepe involvement in the U.S. men's national team could have a huge impact on that. Yeah. If he decides to come our way, I think that he can definitely be a part of this national team. But of those two guys, Julian Arago and Kaden Clark, how do you see either of them factoring into the qualifying in the next few windows?
I think Julian Arago has a much better chance of factoring in, and it's more so, well, he is extremely good. He's probably our second or third best right back at the moment if you put him in the depth chart. And because Greg has played Yedlin on the right and Dest on the left before. There's no reason why you can't switch Arago and Dest around at left back and right back as well. We even talked about left back as being a open position and a position of need. So I do think he was asked to come into camp, but he said, hold on, I'll wait till October to make the decision. Ricardo Pepe coming to the US is such a huge movement, such a huge block to move to get more Mexican Americans just on board with the US and having, I think, Arago was in the Olympics camp with David Ochoa, and it didn't seem like they had the best experience. And I'll chalk that one up to Jason Christ and some others. But all joking aside, like I think Pepe is going to do a lot just by choosing the US and us entrusting him with playing time. David Ochoa, I think he's actually injured, but he wasn't called in as one of the top 4 goalkeepers for the Mexican national team. And if I'm Arago saying, oh man, Ochoa just dedicated himself to the Mexican national team. Pepe dedicated himself to the U.S. Ochoa's not even on the roster. Pepe might get playing time this World Cup qualifying cycle.
Yeah.
I'm probably like starting to lean back towards the U.S. And on the Pepe thing, I feel very vindicated as well. His goals, to your point, like everything in that game was just things that I had pointed out. And it's not all the time, every day, that as a commenter of the game or someone that loves the game,
immediately get vindicated.
Yeah, like not everything I say or you say are going to be right, but in that moment, I felt
that second goal,
especially,
man. That second goal, he kind of just waited for that goalkeeper to cheat on that cross, where just he half a second and he put it right by him. I mean, that was so impressive.
He's so patient, so good at reading what the goalie is doing and where he's leaning. And sorry, we are going way off topic. But Kaden Clark, to that point, he is, I think 2 things are really hurting him right now. One is the position that you mentioned. There's not really a like-for-like position for him on the U.S. men's national team. If he came into camp, I think he would be seen more as like the inverted winger, where he's playing a bit more centrally under the striker. The Red Bulls right now are in shambles, for lack of a better word. And not just are they not getting results and not playing well, the style that they're trying to implement is the modern game in in motion picture. Like they're literally just trying to bully their way to pinball the other team and try and gain opportunities in the opponent's side, where Kaden Clark like really isn't getting opportunities to turn and pass, to drop into positions that you would find him in the U.S. men's national team. And he's really not getting opportunities to counter press, because you're just like, it's not fun to watch. It's almost like watching Barnsley when Daryl DK was on. Like they're really just, it's not fun to watch. It's not a good development style for him to be in. And I think him moving to Leipzig, or potentially moving to Leipzig and getting a loan somewhere else, is going to do wonders for him. But I do hope that Greg is in contact with him, kind of talking through what he needs to do to get into the U.S. men's national team. But yeah, there's more people ahead of him in the depth chart. He doesn't play a like-for-like position for the U.S. men's national team. He's not in a good development style of play to get in. And Julian Arago has all of those things checked off the box to get into this team.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of ties all these guys together, I think, is something that we saw in the Gold Cup, and that is like seize your opportunities, man. Julian Arago was invited to the Gold Cup, and he chose not to participate, and that opened the door for a guy like Shaq Moore to come in and seemingly, out of nowhere on the U.S. men's national team right back depth chart, solidified himself as a guy who's a contender for minutes in World Cup qualifying. Similarly, Kaden Clark was supposed to be on the roster, but had that appendectomy surgery and was unable to be a part of it. And you wonder, if he was able to be a part of it, would that change the way that we'd be discussing this roster going into World Cup qualifying? On the other side of the ocean, you've got 2 guys in Julian Green and Luca De La Torre, who also were given offers to be a part of the Gold Cup, and also turned him down. And at the time, I thought that that was the correct move, that they would be better served staying with their teams and establishing themselves there. But you saw this Gold Cup team come together and solidify themselves, and out of it came some guys that Greg is comfortable with in certain positions, and he went with those guys for the World Cup qualifying roster. So it really speaks to, like, whenever you get an opportunity with this squad, because of how quickly talent is developing on it, that you got to take it, man. There's just not a lot of opportunities to get on this roster. So whenever you have one, you better seize it and you better make the most of it.
Yeah, if there's one thing that I've learned about the U.S. men's national team over the last year is that things change way faster than you expect them to. And someone can rise and fall in a matter of weeks. And if you don't take your chance, or if you're not performing at a club level, then it's very easy for you to miss that opportunity with this team.
Yeah, I saw a take going around recently that it's easier for MLS players to make the roster than it is for European players. And I think that that's accurate. I think that that's true. And I don't think it's true for the reason given on Twitter. I think it's true because humans go with things that they're familiar with more often than not. You know, if we're looking for a realtor, or if we're looking for an attorney or something like that, the reason why those guys spend so much money on advertising is because they want to create a sense of familiarity with you before you go into that situation where you're looking for someone to hire. In that same token, you know, coaches are going to go with guys that they're familiar with and guys that they're confident can do a certain role for them. So the guys that are in camp and with them and around them are the ones that they're more often than not going to go with. Unfortunately, as it stands for the U.S. men's national team, if you're on that second tier, if you're on that tier, that B team side, there are a few opportunities for you. There is the January camp, and there are off-year Gold Cups. And the January camp specifically does cater to those MLS players because it's not during a open window for international players. So the only guys who are able to play in that as international players are guys that are not in favor with their club at the moment. The other one this year was the Gold Cup, which favored MLS players again just because of the timing. So with that being said, because of the way things are worked out right now, it is easier for an MLS guy to make it into the U.S. men's national team than it is for like a lower tier European guy. So I do wonder if in the future, if there's ever going to be a situation where we have like Euro only B team tournaments or B team camps, because this problem is kind of growing as more guys get to Europe, and we're kind of segmenting our player base by an ocean and by player schedules because of MLS schedules versus the rest of Europe schedules. So I wonder if there's an option down the road. But at the moment, one thing that I know is true is that if you are a top 5 Champions League player on a top 5 Champions League club and you are playing regularly with your team, you're going to get in the U.S. men's national team. So there's always that.
Yeah, I talked about this in a recent video when the roster dropped, is if anything, the ceiling and the floor that you need to expect to be called into this team has risen exponentially. Yeah. And if you're, like, say you're Owen Otasawi, who we haven't even mentioned, is going to be playing for Club Brugge, Champions League team. If you're not performing like at a 7 or 8 out of 10 level week in and week out for a club in Belgium, you might not make the roster even if your team is playing in Champions League. If you're Brendan Aronson and you're playing in Austria and you're killing it, you're really in form, you're probably going to get a call, but Pulisic might get the call over you because he's playing consistently for Chelsea. So I agree with both of you where, like, Twitter at this point does have a point. They are right that I think it's easier for MLS players to get noticed and to be called in. And you're also right. Like, the familiarity, I think a lot of people discount Greg's experience as a coach in MLS and just knowing US players. But yeah, if you're going to compare like Sebastian Lletget or Christian Roldan to Luca De La Torre, I can see why Greg would go with the MLS guys.
Yeah. And two guys we didn't talk about who are Serie A guys are the Venezia guys. Gianluca Busio and Tanner Tessman. Have you had an opportunity to see those guys play? And if so, what do you think are their opportunities to make it in this World Cup qualifying cycle?
So I did watch the game where Gianluca Busio started. I didn't see Tanner Tessman play yet. I think Tanner Tessman's going to be really interesting to watch develop because he's kind of one of those people that have been hyped up as an athlete with a soccer brain and not the other way around. But I also think those are the players that can really grow a lot when they're in kind of the 18 to 23 year range.
Mm-hmm.
Gianluca Busio, again, if I'm doing the eye test where if he belonged on the field, he was maybe one of the top 3 or 4 players for Venezia in that game, except for the moment when he gave the ball away that
Yeah.
led to a goal. There's very obvious things that Busio needs to improve on, which is the tracking back. And if they're going to play him in the 6, which it seemed like they were, like he's not as good as Andrea Pirlo yet to say, I'm going to put you there to pass and spray balls out, but I don't need you to defend because you're so good at that other thing. Like
And to
he's
be
not
fair,
so
who
good.
in the world is? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Jorginho might be the closest to that,
Yeah.
and he's a super pragmatic player.
Yeah, so I do think there's opportunities, especially for Busio having been a part of the Gold Cup, to your point. Like, I think he took those opportunities as well as he could have. They weren't perfect, but I think he did enough to be in the conversation. Again, if I'm Greg and I'm consistently talking with the clubs and seeing what they want to do, I'm assuming because they've just moved there that they were kind of out of contention for this window. But I do think Busio has a very good shot to make the October roster, especially if they start trusting him to start more Serie A games. And he can, I hope that coach shows him that footage and just kind of like pumps it into him that he needs to be running back. He needs to have a higher work rate on defense.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not optimistic, man. I remember a few years ago whenever Matt Miazga got like his one shot at Chelsea, and he had a similar game in which he was okay defensively. He was okay in possession, nothing special, but he did make like one or two crucial mistakes that led to chances against Chelsea, and he got the hook, man. We never saw him again. I
yeah.
remember there was one game where he got pulled at halftime or something like that, and then another game that he got one more game, and that was it. That was his shot at Chelsea. That was that moment. And I'm worried with a guy like Gianluca Busio playing for a team in Venetia where you can't make those. You flat out you can't make those mistakes.
Yeah.
We can say he had a great game otherwise, but he had that one mistake that led to a goal. Whenever you're talking about a team that's going to be in the relegation zone for the entire season and is going to be struggling for just a point, you can't make those mistakes, and the coach can't afford to play that guy. On the flip side, a guy like Tanner Tessman, who's a little bit more of a box-to-box, I think he has more opportunity for the U.S. men's national team right now just because of his play style and kind of what we need at the national team versus Busio, who, if he's going to play the 6, is just a completely different player than Tyler Adams and Kellen Acosta, and we'd have to just completely switch around the way that we play. And I'm not certain that Gianluca Busio is a good enough player in this moment to force Greg Berhalter to completely change the way that he plays. I'm still a Busio stan. I'm still going to watch every single game.
I need to rewind to the first time we talked a few months ago.
I still love watching the player play. I mean, his technique is just so flawless and beautiful. I always had questions about, whenever he gets to a higher level and the athletes around him are better and he's got less time on the ball, is he going to pick up that urgency? Is he going to play a little bit faster? Is he going to look a little bit stronger? Is his defense going to pick up? And we didn't see any of that. He looked exactly the same as he did in MLS in that regard, if not worse. He did have all the offensive stuff. His strengths were good, but his weaknesses were just not good enough at the moment to expect regular playing time at that level. So I am concerned. I am waving my caution flag as a Gianluca Busio stand.
You have a right to be, right? Because, like, when you're talking about skills like passing or shooting, those are difficult to be improved on consistently. When you're talking about tracking a runner or running in general, like those should be very easy things to know. Okay, I'm starting my first game in a top division in Europe. I should probably give 110% effort, and it didn't really look like that was there. And I think that's what scares me more than his technical ability or his positioning or anything like that.
Yeah, and at the bottom, in the end, that's what it's all about is getting results with this particular group of players. And so far, Greg has done a pretty good job with that in this last season. So before I let you go, I've already been through your favorite jersey. I've already been through your game day routine. So tell me, this El Salvador game is going to be 9 p.m. Central in the United States. I know you're in the UK, so what are you going to be able to watch this game live? What is your plan for that?
Yes, and I hope the FBI isn't watching, but I stream all the games. And so I will say, being in the UK, I'm 5 hours ahead of Eastern time. Usually, if the game is at, so let's see, if it's at 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern time, those are the most difficult. Like 1 or 2 a.m. is very difficult to get up because
Oof.
I try and sleep right after they're done. But sometimes I'm like so hyped after the
Oof.
game that's hard to lay back down. This one coming up against El Salvador, I think, is at 3 a.m. my time, which actually, like, I'm usually early to bed. So if I can go to bed at like 9:30, 10 and wake up a little before 3, then five
Yeah,
and a
you're
half,
golden.
6 hours, I'm good to go for my actual work day, which I'll have after that. But yeah, I will be waking up at 3 a.m. I'll be probably active on Twitter, but I do like to focus on the game when I'm watching it.
All right, Jake, tell everybody about your channel and what they can expect from you whenever they head over to FIFA America.
Sure. Yeah. So FIFAmerica is the channel. I am really trying to just give a perspective of someone that I have a few of my FA licenses here in England. I have some USSF coaching licenses. I'm really just trying to give a perspective of what is happening on the field, maybe what Greg's perspective is, and why things are happening the way that they are, and not necessarily like a overview type of reaction to the game. So like you mentioned, Ricardo Pepe is the last player I did a scouting report on. You can watch how he picks his shot, how he reads the goalkeeper, how he does connections with his team, wall passing, how his vision is. So all those things are hopefully helpful to the US fan base where they can just learn a little bit more. I'll also plug, I'm a co-host for a podcast called Yanks Go Talking with an astrophysicist at New Mexico University. So definitely check that out. We're on 10 episodes right now. But yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm just happy to be here. Happy to be back on your channel, Sam. And yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm happy that World Cup qualifying is just around the corner, man. Jake, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, if you're still watching, make sure you hit that like button and hit subscribe. For Jake of FIFA America, my name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report.